All systems are go for this edition of the Public Square from the American Policy Roundtable, dedicated to reaching all people with a message of liberty. My name is Wayne Shepherd, and Dave Zanotti is with me for the moment and will continue through the hour, but others will join us a bit later, Dave.
Yeah, Wayne, it's great to be together again, and mindful of the fact we now really truly have a new political season in America, and that we are in the process of launching a new federal administration, a new presidency, and seating a new Congress, House and Senate, and in many cases, seating new in the sense of different legislative majorities across the country. So we're in a new era, so to speak. The question is, will it last a year, 18 months, 24 months, 4 years, 8 years, 12 years? And we've been talking a lot and getting a lot of feedback from listeners to the Public Square on this question that the next 2 years will determine the next 12.
Yeah.
In other words, what happens in this window will take us to the next. So all the momentum is looking forward. There's so much energy going out now as to what's going to happen in Congress and in the states. And as is often the case, when everyone's looking in one direction, here on the Public Square, we start looking in a different direction.
That's what I love about you.
In other words, we're all on the square, everyone's focused on this, but suddenly we step over to another part and start looking at the other avenues that come into this square and go out of this square and say, now, wait a second, there's more to the story than what everybody's focused on. So I thought this would be a wonderful time to go back and ask ourselves, when we start over in America again, when America begins again, what do we go back to? What do we start with? So let's use this as an illustration. Let's say we're working now in some magical kingdom that either Tolkien or Lewis created, and that the realm of the governance of this magical land is based upon the benevolence of a king or a queen, or the tyranny of a king or a queen. And perhaps now we're talking about liberating that area, like Lewis talked about in Narnia. A place where it was always winter, but never Christmas, because there had been a usurper that had come in and taken away the true vision for the land, and in fact had mitigated against the very creator of the land. Well, when Americans come back, we don't come back to do battle with the king. We settled that. That started in 1776 and ended in 1783, and then a little bit more in 1812.
Yeah, and there was a battle over that at the beginning, whether it was going to be a monarch or not, right?
Right. But we didn't replace the old mechanism with a slightly renewed mechanism. We changed it with something different altogether. Now, in the meantime, since America was started and multiple hundreds of years and generations later, you and I came on the scene. So if we're going to begin again, where do we go back to? Do we go back to the grave of George Washington and hold a prayer service there, or a tributary, or do we go back to certain statues? Do we go back to history museums? What do we go back to if America's going to begin again? Do we go back to the characters, to the ancestors? Well, not really.
Yeah, I'm reading a book right now about the relationship between George Washington and Hamilton, and Jefferson plays a big part in it as well. And, you know, there was a lot of turmoil in those first two presidential terms.
Incredible amount of turmoil. And the relationship between George Washington and Alexander Hamilton is a unique manifestation of Washington's Christian character. And his sense of loyalty and mentorship. You know, George Washington's the father of our country, but he had no children of his own.
Right.
How's the irony for that? And in many ways, people feel like he almost adopted Hamilton.
Yeah, treated him like a son many times, although their relationship had its cooling off times as well.
Like any adolescent, Alexander Hamilton stormed out of the room on multiple occasions because he didn't get his way.
So just all that to say that turmoil is not new to our age, is it?
Yes, and it wasn't fast enough. But we don't go back and worship Washington and Hamilton. We don't go back to just the characters. What we go back to whenever we begin again are the ideas. The ideas of America. So when the new administration comes in and a president makes a speech, if historically you go back and they're usually retelling those ideas, they're in essence knitting the continuity of what we're doing today to the fabric of what we've been doing from the beginning. Now, on occasion, some presidents have gotten exceptionally creative with the knitting needles. I would point out to the piece that we did, that we released on an analysis of Barack Obama's speech, and the booklet's titled A Spare Hall, in which basically what Barack Obama did with the assistance of Jon Favreau, not movie Jon Favreau, but speech writing Jon Favreau, much younger. And Jon Favreau and Barack Obama wrote a speech in which they reinterpreted the Declaration of Independence, basically turning it into a collectivist document. They didn't have the courage to call it socialist or communist. They called it collectivist. And in essence, rewrote the meanings in very adroit and efficient Obama language, where he says one thing that we all understand and then redefines it into something completely differently. And we tracked that process and published on that speech. Now, people have been publishing on inaugural addresses for a long time. Inaugural addresses are significant. Can you imagine the significance of Lincoln's inaugural address?
Right.
And his second inaugural address.
I was going to say
George
first or
Washington's.
second. Yeah, right.
Oh, so I mean, these are significant issues. Interestingly enough, George Washington's inaugural address was 6 paragraphs. Now, they were 6 long paragraphs, okay, but they were 6 paragraphs. John Quincy Adams, now the 6th president, had expanded the inaugural address. Now, both Washington and Adams could write a lot. John Quincy Adams was an amazing orator.
Right.
It was not unusual for John Quincy Adams to be able to hold an audience for 90 minutes.
Yeah, a fact that his critics had a lot of fun with.
Yes, but his inaugural address, and there was only one because he was a one-term president, his inaugural address expanded all the way to 10 paragraphs. So from the first administration to the 6th, you've got this expansion of 4 whole paragraphs. By the time we get to Barack Obama, you could write a book on what he said, and the same thing with Joe Biden and others, and certainly Donald Trump's first inaugural address might have gone in history as one of the longest of all time. So there's been a lot more words, but the question is there a lot more meaning? When we begin again in America, we go back to the first ideas. Now, some people go there to try to reroute the nation, but we have a tradition of going back again to begin again to the old ideas, to the first ideas that made us what we were. So for that to be effective, we have to be able to read. Because if we don't know how to read, we lose the first ideas.
Yeah, and we're in such a soundbite age. We'll get sound bites of those speeches today, and they'll fly right over our head, won't they?
In fact, I was listening to a podcast recently, and this has been something that's been brought up in multiple cases, but West Huff brought this up on a Joe Rogan conversation. Joe Rogan said, we don't teach kids cursive anymore. And in fact, because we don't teach them cursive, all we teach them is keyboard. And West Huff said, well, then how are they ever going to know what's in the Declaration of Independence?
Oh, boy, yeah.
Something to think about. In fact, that was the generating motivation of the founding generations to make absolutely certain that everybody could read. Because if you couldn't read, you couldn't find the creator that the founders talked about in the Declaration, let alone find the Declaration. So reading is really important. And I wanted to take a few minutes to talk with our audience because so many of the dear people, and I mean dear people and dear friends, and you know, we every now and then we just get a little glimpse at how many people listen to this broadcast across the country and pray for America and communicate with us and often financially support us, which always astounds me because people are supporting an organization that they're looking at, they're examining, they're listening to, and feeling compelled to support. And I can't even begin to tell you how thankful we are for that. We are one of the most bashful organizations that you will find in regards to solicitation. We do not manipulate all of our communications to try to get the listener to respond, to buy something, or to give something. And I think it's because every one of us that's here in this mission started as a donor. Every one of us. We were donors before we were involved in staff. And almost all of us were donors and volunteers before we started as staff. So there's a sense of we're all in this together. It's just kind of the expectation. So one of the things that we are very deeply dedicated to is to reading books and to restoring the necessity of reading. Reading books, restoring books. It's a big thing with us. That's why we've done so much publishing. For a little organization, we've done so much publishing in recent years where we're continuing to trying to get more and more product into the marketplace. Today, I want to take some time in just a few minutes to interview two authors who helped us put a book in print that just was released at Christmas in America that we have not talked about yet, and we need to. It's called The Front Steps.
All right, we're going to get after that in just a few moments. But thanks for this conversation so far, Dave. I think it'll all help us process the next few weeks especially, so I appreciate that. When we come back, we'll talk about that new book. And by the way, we thank our listeners, as Dave said, but we also thank the radio stations for making time available for the Public Square. So take a moment and let the station know of your listening support. We'll be back on the Public Square.
We will be right back for more on the Public Square. Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to the Public Square.
We're back with the Public Square, and Dave Zanotti will rejoin us in just a moment in conversation. But Alan C. Duncan, our executive producer, has joined me, and a special appearance by Anna Welch. Now, the two of you are here, Anna, because together you've written a new book called The Front Steps, and I want to talk about this book with the two of you. So what is The Front Steps?
The Front Steps is a children's book. And it's a true story about a boy who loved to read, who later grows up to be Dr. W.B. Allen, who is a good friend of all of ours, and to the
indeed.
Public Square.
Often heard on the Public Square, right? All right.
Yes. He brings so much wisdom and knowledge every time he's on this program. And this book is about his life and a specific moment in time in his childhood.
Yeah, it's an inspiring story. It really is. We'll get into the story. But, Alan, who do you think this book is aimed at age-wise? It's for children primarily, although, frankly, I think a lot of adults will benefit from this book as well. But when you guys put it together, who are you thinking of?
Sure. It is a grade school aged. We were actually just talking today. We were talking with somebody who is on the board of a local school, local Christian school, and they just got word from the school that they want to put it in every classroom, grade 1 through 5. So I think that's first of all, it's a happy day to hear that, but it's also, I think, indicative of the age range that this book's for.
Yeah. Hey, Anna, can I share this note that you received from this librarian?
Yes.
Okay, this comes from Mary Hassler, who is CEO of the Harford County Public Library in Belcamp, Maryland. She says this book is beautifully illustrated and deeply heartwarming. It's a picture book introducing readers to William, a young boy who discovers the world through his love of reading. Set during a time when African Americans were prohibited from entering public libraries, William's sadness is met with the quiet act of kindness. A librarian brings him a book to read on the library's steps, inspired by his love of books and fueled by his dream of creating a library open to everyone. William grows up to become the champion of reading and public libraries for all. And this lovely story, she says, touches the heart and soul, leaving readers filled with hope and inspiration. You have to be delighted to get a librarian's response like that, Anna.
Yes, for sure. It was such a beautiful comment she left us, and she really explains the story beautifully in a few words. The story is about overcoming, and it takes the reader back in time into a period of history known as segregation that children will learn a little bit about. And William has to experience injustice and what happens when you experience injustice and you see his life overcome that. Mm-hmm. And we try to tell that story in the front steps.
Yeah, Alan, I was thinking about that very point, that it could lead a young boy to bitterness and resentment, or it can lead to someone like Dr. Allen has turned out to be, someone who's very kind and yet a champion of the cause at the same time.
That's a great point, Wayne. There isn't a trace of bitterness in Dr. W.B. Allen. It's kind of the antithesis of that. And he told this story. He told it in his book, The State of Black America, and it was sort of kind of a bit of an aside. That's a long book, and it's a scholarly work with a lot of contributions from different scholars. And then he also told it in person to my dad and I when we were down, able to meet with him in his home when he was so graciously giving us his personal library, and to hear him tell the story. You really get this sense that there's no bitterness there. It's not as though he was calling what happened to him right in any way. He obviously knew that it was not, but it wasn't something that he was going to let stop him. And he also was able to see the humanity of the librarian in the story as well.
Yeah, true. Well, I want to talk more about this story, but Anna, I have to point out that this book is beautifully illustrated in color, I might add. Talk about that.
We had a wonderful time working with Amy Selstad, our illustrator. We searched high and low, and she was a really wonderful addition to this project. Alan and I met with her often and shared the vision and talked with her all about Dr. Allen, and she really took our ideas and her ideas and put paint on paper and brought all of that to life. It was a really neat process because we got to learn about Dr. Allen's childhood, which was just a precious thing. And we tried to take little things we were learning about him and sprinkle them throughout the book and tell a story within the artwork as well.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the most fun aspects of working on this project were those meetings that you and I had with Amy, just trying to figure out how do you bring these words to life in a picture book format. So it's really I love kids books, children's picture book, and I know you do as well. And I think that's important to talk about with this whole process. Sometimes people have an agenda when they write a children's picture book on the left and on the right, or conservatives or progressives. They have an agenda. They want to kind of cram a point in. But sometimes you don't get the sense that these people actually care about this genre of art. I think it's a beautiful art form. It's an art form that's been used in this country for decades upon decades, hundreds of years probably. And so we're people who actually like this genre and read this work. And so I hope that that's evident when people read this book.
And with the authoring, it was a teamwork. So Alan and I were part of that, and we kind of have our names on the book, but it was a whole group effort. And even in that group effort, we tried so hard to just tell the story. We're, not go over the top one way or another, but let's just tell Dr. Allen's story. Let's tell that story of when he was a little boy and he saw injustice, but there was that humanity from the librarian in that moment. And what did his life look like after that? And then the same thing with the artwork. Like, let's just tell the story with the artwork. And we learned so much about Dr. Allen, like he was one of 12 children. And he loved to read, and he lived in this beach town. And some of his favorite books were these things. And he had a boxer puppy for a small stint before it started raiding the chicken coop. And then, mom had to send the dog away. And so we learned so many little priceless treasures about Dr. Allen. And we did try to put some of those things throughout the work in the artwork.
So there's going to be a follow-up book about the boxer and the chickens, huh? Is that what you're telling me?
That could be a whole story right there.
Okay, all right. Well, the combination of the pictures, the drawings, and the text is such a powerful combination. Doesn't surprise me, the two of you who are both artists. Anna, you're quite the photographer, and Alan, you're videographer for everything. You do everything well. So it doesn't surprise me that you would see. Did you see this book in your mind's eye before it came about in any way?
Oh, yes.
I think we did. Yeah.
Yeah. We totally did.
We both knew that we kind of wanted it to be watercolor. For some reason, we just that felt right. We wanted it to have that feel.
Yes, and before we met with Amy, we kind of went through the plot line, and I mean, between me and Alan, we had enough ideas to fill a room with. So Amy did an amazing job of landing those ideas and bringing her ideas as well to her artwork. So yeah, I think both of us saw it in our heads for sure.
You both are parents, and you've read the book, told the story to your kids. Tell me about some of the reactions you've had from your own kids.
I think my girls were just proud of Mom, to be quite honest.
That's okay. I like that. Yeah. They should be.
I have an all-girl house, so I think my daughters saw the hard work that I had put in, and they were just...
Yeah. And they're a little young yet, and so the message might not be fully understood, but it will be over time, won't it? You're planting a seed, aren't you?
Yeah, and I'm glad I could show them. I'm getting choked up over here thinking about my girls, so I think I could show them what it looks like for a project. And this is what I love about what I get to do here, is taking something from the very beginning and seeing it all the way through. And I got to kind of explain that to them throughout this process too, on what it looks like to take an idea and see it through to an actual product. And now you get to hold this book that Mom helped make.
That's cool.
And to me, that I think that was as meaningful as the story was. I think that really hit home to them. I was like, wow, Mom, we're really proud of you. So
yeah.
And Anna did do that. She won't say it, but she went back and forth with Amy just to make sure, many times that I was not a part of, to make sure that all the resolutions were right. And then she went back and forth with the print house to make sure that everything was right. So she did really bring this across the finish line. That's 100% true. So her girls should be proud of that. So I'm glad they are.
Yeah.
I think for my boys looking at this book, I think there's kind of just a sense that, oh, my goodness, the world used to be like that. Really, Black children couldn't go into the public library. Just the recognition of that. They happen to go to a school with lots of different ethnicities represented, and so just the fact that was happening on American soil in living memory of people was a bit of a wake-up call for a 10-year-old who's known nothing other than, like, oh, my best buddy is Black. So it's just a reminder for folks.
What a great lesson.
I think this book is a entry-level way to talk about that subject, segregation. It's a very entry level of starting those conversations. And that was one of the purposes of the book, was to, after you're done reading this, there's a portion in the back for the parent or whoever might be reading the book to the child to kind of describe what this time period of segregation really looked like. And it talks about the life of Dr. Allen a little bit more in depth as well. But it's an opportunity to have those conversations with your kids or the children you're reading this book to. And I think it's an entry-level way to do that.
Yes, I agree. And so people should know, if you're not ready to have those kind of conversations with your kids, then don't get the book. But or get it and wait.
Get it and wait. That's my advice.
Yes,
right?
Yeah, get it and wait. But that will be in there. Yeah, there will be some things that you'll have to discuss with your kids. So that's obviously up to each parent as how they want to do that.
Well, it's the latest from the American Policy Roundtable in the Public Square, The Front Steps, this children's book that Anna and Alan have put together. It's very easy to get a copy, thefrontstepsbook.com. I like that, thefrontstepsbook.com. Make it easy for all of us. You'll find all the information there. Let's take our break on the Public Square. The rest of the team will rejoin us in a moment. Once again, thanks for listening to this edition of The Public Square. Rejoining us is Dave Zanotti, but also joining us now, along with Alan C. Duncan, is Jeff Sanders, Melanie Elsey, and Rob Walgate, all the usual suspects around the table here today. But you all have seen the Front Steps book we just talked about with Anna and Alan. It's remarkable. Dave, thanks for putting that together.
Well, there's a secret about this text we should reveal to everyone, and that is that I think this story has as much impact on grown-ups that are reading it to their children as the kids that are hearing it.
That's a good point. Yep.
Because it's a true story, and it's told very well. Melanie, I see you smiling. You've had your hands on this book, and I'm guessing you've shared it around to a few people already.
A few. I think that's what's most impactful is not just that it's a true story, but it's a true story of someone who's around today to talk about it. Sometimes when we read true stories, they're stories from the past and the person is no longer with us. But this story has impacted the life of someone we know, we talk with frequently, that we share life with. And it's very meaningful.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that over the Christmas break time, Dr. Allen sent Anna and I a picture of one of his friends reading it to his grandkids. And so just to get that kind of feedback was just very special for us to see. Mm-hmm. So you're right. You can still interact with this person in real time.
My mom got the book for all my nieces and nephews for Christmas. And then she gave it to them, and then she was collecting it from all of them. She was like, well, I want you to take it and get them signed. And I was like, okay. I'm like, they can keep the book. I'm like, I'll get some signed, then we'll swap them out, give them to others. So we'll make it all work, Mom. Let them keep the book and read it. And she was like, well, I was going to let them read it first and then give it to you. She was
gathering them up.
Well, she said she was going to let them read them first. She's going to yell at me for telling that on air, but that's all right. She's yelled at me for worse.
I saw this book over at my grandson's house, and I haven't had the opportunity to read it to him yet, but I can't wait for that moment.
Do we need to do an Italian language version of it?
Since you say that, my daughter-in-law probably could. She's fluent in both languages. They have your first bilingual version of it. That'd be great.
There you go.
We really should look at languages. We really should. And what's exciting about this is the story of someone who overcame evil by doing good. Mm-hmm. That's Romans 12:21. And Dr. William B. Allen is an example of that in real life, in real time. And we are most honored to call him friend. Anna gets choked up talking about her kids. I get choked up talking about her kids too. But I also get choked up talking about our friend William B. Allen because he is such a model. So this is a story, and it is, I think Dr. Allen has used a word in my life experiences with him that comes back all the time, and that he calls a project that he affirms artful. Particularly in conversation. And I think textually and in the arts, this is an artful book. It's done with sincerity, and it's done honestly. And so I think it can be very, very helpful. And it just points out one more example on one of the objectives that we have as an organization, as a mission to America, is to restore reading books. Now, we're also doing, as soon as I say that, I want to be full disclosure, we're doing a video of this book as well, with the hope that the video will cause people to want to have an actual copy all the more, because we think this story needs to get out in every possible mechanism that we can, but we wanted to do the book first because it's special to do so in restoring the reading of books. So Dr. Allen, of course, is a political philosopher. He is, there's words just sort of cease to really describe all the accuracy of what he's done. He's also an expert on the American presidency. And he's also a profound expert on the realm of the Declaration and the Constitution. And so it's interesting that his field of study, motivated by his experiences as a child and his love for reading, moved him into the arena of America and his love for America, for the American principles. We were talking earlier in this broadcast about when America returns to begin again, what do we return to? Well, we return to the ideas. And that's now where we are as a country, the question of returning to ideas. We've heard a lot of conversation in the last several months about the sense that there's a renewal, a revival, a reformation. There's something going on out there in America. People are reconsidering the whole process of how we do business here as a country. We were also talking about the reality of a new administration and inaugural addresses. Needless to say, Dr. Allen and I have spent a lot of time talking about inaugural addresses. My question is this beginning again. Look, we've got a lot of people in public office who don't even know the first ideas of America. Where do they start from? Do you think it's possible for us to actually get back to that place that we can actually reappropriate this common knowledge of the ideas that make us who we are?
Not without study, not without an intention to go back and relook at some of the documents that we frequently are familiarizing ourselves with, whether it be the founding documents. I mean, I've mentioned more than once on air that the curriculum for the schools that are being used and that were developed even 20 years ago were not emphasizing the founding documents in their full text. They would teach around them, things that had been written about them, but to examine the actual primary source documents is not common. And we're not going to understand founding principles without actually studying the founding documents.
And I think we could do a better job of taking the politics out of all of it. I mean, we should all be on the same page when it comes to talking about the truth, when it comes to understanding history. I feel like in today, whether we're talking about the inauguration or we're talking about a campaign, everything is so politicized down to the word. The fact that if someone, in the Senate, if R's and D's get along with on something, and they should get along on almost so many things. When you think about it, there's an entertainment show that's going to make a big deal about it just to get ratings. I feel like there's so many people, even if there's a little bit of fire, that want to pour gasoline on the fire just to get clicks, to get views, all of those things.
My children use their conversations with their contemporaries as an opportunity to teach. And I'll give you one example. So when someone comes up to and all of my children are adults. They're all grown up now. Sadly, I wish they were still 4 years old again. But anyway, when they come up to them and say, "Oh, we're going to lose all our rights starting next week," that is the moment for my adult children then to say, "Well, you realize we have 3 branches of government, right? Do you know what they are? The executive, which is the president, the legislative, which is Congress, and there are 2 houses, and then we have the Supreme Court. Explain to me how, with those 3 branches, you can lose your rights. Do you understand how difficult it is for something to be passed in Congress?" And they usually gasp and they don't know what you're talking about. And so you can just kind of calm them down and say, look, it doesn't matter. If you look over the last 30 years, this administration or that administration did everything happen that they said was going to happen. All the bad things that were going to happen if so-and-so got elected. Did all that take place? No. Why? Because we have 3 branches of government that put a halt to the vast majority of these things.
Thank you, Jeff. Let's take a quick break on the Public Square and come back to this conversation now with the team. And it happens in just a moment, so you stay with us.
Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to the Public Square.
All right, let's continue with the public square. Earlier, we talked about this new book called The Front Steps. You can tell we're very excited about it. It's actually being published by Kids on the Square, which is part of the American Policy Roundtable. And again, the website is thefrontstepsbook.com. So please check that out when you can and order a copy or 10 if you want. That'd be just great. All right, thefrontstepsbook.com. All right, Alan, back to you.
Well, I was just thinking as we've been talking about this book and talking about Dr. Allen, the sheer irony of the person that was sitting on those front steps, the mind, the smartest guy. He would have been the smartest guy in the library at 7 years old.
Yes,
Okay, this is somebody who speaks and reads and writes 5 languages at least. This is also a true patriot, someone who loves his country. So the smartest and most patriotic person in the town couldn't go in the library. It just shows what happens if all you look at are exterior appearances. You can make really dumb choices like that as a society.
I also can hear Dr. Sterling Glover saying the unmanaged strangeness of God through all of this.
Right.
Earlier, Jeff, you made the comment about people saying we're going to lose our rights. I think that more than anything else that's been said today is the reason that we so desperately need to restore reading in our country and to remind ourselves that when America begins again historically, particularly when there are new presidential administrations, they hearken back to the first words of the Declaration of Independence. Because if we believe in the Declaration of Independence, if we believe those words, it is impossible for anyone to ever lose their rights, ever, because those rights are given by the Creator, and He does not take them back.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we can define the word lose. You might lose the practice of those rights, but we are a long, long way from that. In fact, if you study American history, honestly, as a progression of people trying to live out a set of ideas, even a story like the story of William B. Allen on the front steps, as you all have mentioned, the unmanaged strangeness of God, that perhaps the smartest mind in that community as a 7-year-old child is sitting not permitted to go into that library, was simply turned into motivational fuel to, in essence, help that person overcome and grow even more to become one of the great liberators of the American mind in this century in regards to understanding the true meaning of the Declaration, the true meaning of the Constitution. And America is a perpetual unfolding of these ideas if we take them seriously.
Right. Dave, that experience, that injustice that was done to him didn't cause him to hate his country and didn't cause him to want to undo his country or found a new one. As you're saying, it caused him to press deeper into the founding truths, the confession that though people weren't living up to it, the confession was right.
And Alan, I think it's really important that in the last 20 years or so, and it began before that, but it's certainly in the last 20 years, it's been publicly manifest, where we've had people painting the story of America with brushes that basically knock out any segments where we failed to believe these principles and execute them well. We don't tell about the places where, in spite of failure, people got up and kept going. And that the story of America is a progressive understanding of the liberation that comes to the human spirit when we put the words of the Declaration into practice. That's the story. And you say, well, yeah, but it wasn't perfect, and they did that. Wait, hello? It's still not perfect today.
What kind of world do we live in? Find me a perfect place.
Dave, when you look at this, the public speeches that were made by our early presidents, it strikes me that they are trying to help us understand what it would take to lose what they were giving us. You know, they weren't describing how far we had strayed, but they were saying, this is what you need to do to keep what this gift is that we are giving you. It's very insightful.
Yes. That's really insightful, especially look at Washington and you look at the first 5 presidents. Then we get to John Quincy Adams' inaugural address, all 10 paragraphs of it. And it's interesting now because this is 1825. And John Quincy Adams has an interesting twist on his speech. And we were talking about this earlier. People write about John Quincy Adams that he was cranky. And I think that's kind of fake news. I think that it came from this simple fact. John Quincy Adams participated politically with at least 4 different parties in his career. And in the end, none of them liked him, and he didn't like any of them. And when he became president of the United States, what he basically said is we've gone through a period of serious and severe stratification where political parties have led us into war against one another. And he's basically saying, I hope we're done with that for a while. Because he could remember in the beginning what it was like in the founding when there were no political parties. And this is one of the escaped lessons of his first inaugural address and his only inaugural address, is that this was a guy that superseded political parties his whole career and spoke his mind instead, because he remembered in America when we were all in this together. And that's the story.
Aren't most people who stand for the truth hated anyway? I mean, if like I said earlier, that if you don't have any haters, you really haven't accomplished anything. Jesus himself said, "They hated me, they're going to hate you too." So if someone stands for the truth, they're going to be called cranky and irritable and all that kind of stuff. That just tells me that they've got conviction.
Or it also could tell you that maybe I really relate to John Quincy Adams because I hear a lot of the same stuff about me.
Most of the time, you're not cranky. I think you're okay. Most of the
Jeff,
time.
you and Melody discovered some things while you were out in the boardroom. What were you trying to tell us earlier?
Yes, while we were out in exile, Melanie asked me, when did we, and we did some research, when did we go from an inaugural, when was it always on January 20th? And I said, no, for a long time, it was March 4th.
Mm-hmm. Well, it struck me that President Washington's inaugural address was in April. And he wasn't sworn in until the April after a November election. And my whole life, my experience has been January, the president is sworn in. So you begin to look back through history. And Jeff was basically teaching me that for the vast majority of the time, it was the beginning of March 4th.
Yeah, well, I said, I know that it changed sometime during the administration of Franklin Roosevelt because Harry Truman was sworn in January. But I had the dates wrong. I thought Franklin Roosevelt was sworn in on March 4th on his last term in office in 1945. But actually it changed after the passage of the 20th Amendment.
Passed by Congress in 1932 and ratified in 1933. So that specifies January 20th as the date that the new administration would begin and the old one would cease.
Well, it just so happens that some of our listeners may have to leave us now at this time, but there's more to come on The Public Square, and thankfully, you can catch the rest of today's program at thepublicsquare.com. So everybody else, stay right where you are.
Need a breath of fresh air? How about a musical pause that brings a moment of refreshment? Hymns on the Square is the place to gather to hear the inspiring music of artists who have contributed to this mission for decades. Visit thepublicsquare.com and walk on over to Hymns on the Square for a free concert of hope and a breath of fresh air. Hymns on the Square at thepublicsquare.com.
Well, we've covered a lot of bases today on the public square, and it's been fun. We've got the team around the table still here. That's Dave Zanotti and Jeff Sanders, Melanie Elsey, Alan C. Duncan, and Rob Walgate. Dave?
Well, there's always a method to the madness, hopefully, Wayne. And part of what we wanted to share with our dearest friends, our listeners, and our station managers and owners and operators today was our continuing commitment to reading and to primary source documents. Because we've talked about the Washington inaugural address, and we've talked about John Quincy Adams' inaugural address. One was 6 paragraphs, one was 10 paragraphs. We could talk about JFK's inaugural address. Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. I wonder if it's time to put that back on billboards all over America. But the constant idea that there needs to be a retelling of these first principles and the history, and that's what we do here at the American Mission Center, what we do here at the American Policy Roundtable on the public square, and all of our media outreaches and affiliates, whether it's a public event, speaking events, Christmas in America. We believe it's essential that we continue to retell the first principles and to tell the story with all of its failings, all of its warts, all of its sadness, all of its death, all of its bitterness, and all of its joy, because it is the human struggle of people wrestling with what does it mean to be free. Now, we do have a bias in this, but it is not a partisan bias towards a political party. We have a bias, if you will, in that we are convinced that when the framers talked about the Creator, they weren't kidding. When they talked about, and this is reading essential core first documents, the Declaration, the Constitution, the Northwest Ordinance, the text of congressional debates, the rulings of the Supreme Court. When you go back to original source documents and you watch people struggling with this, not historians that retell the story from a perspective of 1960 or 1970 or 2010, not people who read back bias or bitterness or disappointment or frustration onto the record, but you read the words of the people who were there themselves. You get an understanding of the true portrayal of the American experience. And what's essential to understand is the people who started this were very careful to warn us, please, don't try this alone. We didn't get here out of the genius of our own intellects. This is not an autonomous experiment where wonderfully intelligent people came together and created a formula. Now just do what we tell you to do and it will all work out right. No, they began with the words of the Declaration. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power from the consent of the governed. They knew this American experiment came from somewhere, and it came from someone. That is our bias. Our bias is the Declaration. Our bias is the Constitution. And we believe that those documents can still teach us more about how to live in accordance with the ultimate liberator, the God of the Bible, the one who came in the person of Christ to set us free. So it's our intention between now and 2026, on that 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, to continue to bring forth new publications, new stories, new programs, new broadcasts, new events that keep retelling the story and give people tools to tell that story as well. It's time, I believe, we believe, for the real story to be retold one more time. Regardless of who's the president, regardless of what happens in the midterm elections, regardless of who the next president is, the story is bigger than the players.
And I think when you look at the structure of the Declaration and the Constitution and the forward thinking of the founders, we think about governments of the day around the world, and so much is set up on what's going to happen here and now. There's not much forward thinking It's all about how much can I get while I'm here on this rock, right? How much can I get while I'm on earth? And that's why I appreciate reading the Declaration and the Constitution, for the understanding of it was meant for a republic that was going to survive and hopefully thrive for years and years and years. It wasn't, those documents weren't self-serving for the short term.
I think a thread of study over time, especially for young students moving up through the years of their education, should start with the documents, of course, the Declaration, the Constitution. But I think it wouldn't hurt to just simply study all of the inaugural addresses, to get a picture, a photograph of how things shifted and changed throughout history, what the perspective was of the person coming into an office brand new, or maybe it's an inaugural address for their second term. But I just think the inaugural addresses provide color, like sort of the fabric of who we are as a country, and a snapshot at any given point in time. I think it would be a fascinating study.
I can't think of a better set of original documents, Melanie, to work with than inaugural addresses of the presidents. I've had the privilege of studying a number of those and studying some of them with Dr. Allen as well. It's a magnificent study. It really is.
And they're easy to find. They're easy to locate. They're free. You can download them off the internet.
Much better than the State of the Union addresses, because those are political documents in the sense that those are being delivered to the House, to the Senate, on agenda, and that's fine. That's what they're supposed to be. I get all that. But this is when the president, elected by the majority of the people, speaks to all the people. It's fascinating to read.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are just masterpieces. Now, you look at Abraham Lincoln's first and second inaugural addresses, especially his second one, with malice toward none, with charity for all. Those are just masterpieces of English prose.
Yeah, they're very much worth it to read. So the key is the words. The words matter. We are an organization dedicated to those first principles, to those words, and we are rededicated to this. Now, I don't know how between now and 2026 this unfolding will happen for the 250th celebration of the Declaration. All I know is for whatever strength and energy we have, which comes, we hope, from the Holy Spirit and from God's calling and from His Word, and whatever support that we're able to bring together from this community of people all over the country that cares so much, we're going to be plowing into this idea of creating products and opportunities and events and music and programming to get this story retold in such a way that our country is stronger for telling it. This is a lot more than about hot dogs and fireworks. Okay, this is a big deal, the 250th anniversary of the Declaration.
Can we still have some hot dogs and fireworks, though? Would they still be available?
I am suggesting a picnic with a purpose.
Nice.
The record show that was Alan who asked that question.
I will bring the
question.
red and white checkered tablecloth. We'll bring that.
Nice.
Such a meaningful conversation today, guys. Thank you so much for this. I do want to return to the book, the Front Steps book, because this is a story of a man who really has taught us a lot about these very things we've talked about here in the last few minutes, Dave.
Wayne, he's a living example of someone who's overcome based on truth. And an example that as a child, as a middle-aged professor, as an elderly statesman, and one of America's most prominent political philosophers in all of her history, we couldn't speak more highly of William B. Allen, and there's no better place to start than joining him on the front steps.
Yep. And thanks to our own team for putting that book together, which included Anna and Alan. Thank you so much. Appreciate Anna being with us earlier and Alan being with us for the entire show here today. TheFrontStepsBook.com is the place to go. And as I said, you may want to order a copy, or maybe you've got 16 grandchildren and you want a copy for all of them. We can be happy to take that order as well. TheFrontStepsBook.com. It's all published and supports Kids on the Square, which is part of the American Policy Roundtable. Hey, thanks for listening. We'll see you next week on The Public Square.
The Public Square is a broadcast service of the American Policy Roundtable.